Hey guys, it's Katie here. I am the Katie behind all the patterns at Katie DeGraff Knits, host of the Katie Knits podcast, and creator of all of the other videos you see here on my channel. If you're not already, take a moment and subscribe so you don't miss out on another one of my videos. And you're watching, so give it a like and a thumbs up. This video is going to be me showing you my trick for tacking down and binding off and this can be used on any cuff, hem, brim, anywhere you are doing something folded that needs to be tacked down. When you tack it down, even if you go up a needle size, it will take some of the stretch away. There's a lot of places you don't want to do that. A sock cuff, the brim of a hat, the neckline of a sweater, the hem of a sweater that goes around your waist. You don't want to take away the stretch in those areas. So I made it my mission to come up with a way to tack down and bind off these things without losing the stretch. So the first place I did this was on a rolled neckline. Look how stretchy this is. I did this on a half fisherman's rib sweater, which is super stretchy in its own right. So the last thing I want to do is make a neckline, a folded neckline that goes... You don't want that. Who wants that? Plus, getting it over your head, you don't want to take anything away. This is a whip, so don't mind all the unfinished parts. But this is another sweater neckline. Look at the stretch. It leaves a nice finished edge, but that stays super stretchy. Shortly, I will be releasing my Here for the Vibes socks. They have a rolled cuff. These socks are going to go up a certain portion of your calf. You certainly don't want that to be tight. So these are nice and stretchy. And again, it's tacked down, super clean, tacked down nice and clean, but super stretchy. I have a project here that I'm going to tack this cuff down. This is a rolled cuff on a sock. And I'm going to use this to actually show you on an actual project rather than a swatch of how I tack down and bind this off to keep it super stretchy. Now, this method can be used on any stitch count, any stitch pattern, any size needles, anything, does not matter. To work this, you're going to use the same needles you're actually working with, can be used on any stitch pattern, any stitch count, any gauge, any time you are folding down a cuff, hem, brim of any length. Now I'm going to briefly tell you what we're about to do and then I will go show you. But essentially you are tacking down and loosely binding off 2 stitches. Then you're just going to bind off the next 2. So you're alternating. 2 get tacked down and bound off, then 2 just get bound off. Then you just repeat. 2 more get tacked down and bound off, then 2 more just get bound off. And I did try alternating them 1 for 1. So 1 gets tacked down, then 1 just gets bound off, and that didn't really give me any more stretch. But when I alternated them in 2s, it worked. And if you find yourself with an oddball stitch at the end because you had an odd number, not an even number, just work it however it comes to. Does it need to just be tacked down? Does it just need to be bound off? So this does not have to be worked on anything special. So now I am going to go show you how I do this on an actual project. Now, I have my sock cuff here that I'm going to be folding over and tacking down to the inside of my work to essentially give me a folded cuff that is half the height that I've knit. Now, all I recommend having for this that you'll need maybe additional is a removable stitch marker. You do not need to cut your yarn. Do not cut your yarn. You'll be cutting it at the end to weave in. Use the same needles that you're currently working with. Come to your first live stitch. What you're going to do, and keep in mind, we're going to be doing this from the inside of our work, so it's going to be opposite. So if my first live stitches here are knit, on the inside when I look, they're going to be purl. So find that first live stitch, find the column, trace it all the way down to where you first started your cuff, neckline, brim, whatever you're tacking down. So go all the way down, take your removable stitch marker, and insert it to this stitch. So you know where to go. on that first one. And again, this does not matter what stitch pattern you're using. I would recommend working it all in knits just for your own sanity. We have our first live stitch here. We have our first stitch that we're going to pick up here along the first row of whatever ribbing or whatever edge you worked. What you're going to do with this right hand needle is pick up this first stitch where you placed your marker and put it on your left hand needle. You're going to knit these two together. Now we're going to kind of combine an element of Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off in with this. If you're unfamiliar with that has you add a yarn over. This has you slip a yarn over and your last stitch worked both off at the same time. So you have your first stitch that you tacked down. What you're going to do now, and this may be a little fiddly when you first start because you only have one stitch on your right hand needle. You're going to go to the next stitch right next to your stitch marker, the next stitch in line in your first row worked of your ribbing, pattern, whatever you used for your cuff brim neckline. Put that on your left hand needle. At this point, you can remove your stitch marker because we don't need them anymore. So now we have our second stitch picked up from the first row of our cuff, brim, hem, whatever, put on here. And we have our one that's tacked down. You're going to yarn over. Then you're going to knit these two together. This is the next live stitch on your needle and the next that was picked up. I have 3 stitches here. You're going to take the yarn over and the very first stitch tacked down, slide them both over and off your needles. Now you're left with the second stitch that you tacked down. Now regardless of pattern, these next 2 live stitches will just be bound off loosely. Yarn over, we just knit one. I just always knit regardless of the pattern. Take your yarn over and your first stitch worked, slip them over and off. Yarn over, knit one, over and off. So we have 2 stitches tacked down and bound off and 2 just bound off. Now I'm back to, I did a 2x2 rib, so when I get back to my knits get tacked down. That's how I can keep track of it. Now, when you're looking for your next 2 to bind off, I tacked down these guys, then I bound these off, so we're gonna skip those. These 2 are my next to pick up and tack down. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna pick up my next stitch in line to be tacked down. Bring them up and put them on my left hand needle. I'm gonna yarn over like I've been doing, knit these 2 together. This is my picked up stitch and my next live stitch. And then pass my yarn over and previously worked stitch over and off. Now we tack down again. Come to the next stitch in line, bring them up to your left hand needle. Always remember to snug up your working yarn too, to avoid too much gapiness or gaps. So always keep this snug. I'm gonna yarn over. I'm gonna take our yarn over and our previously worked stitch, slip them up, over, and off the stitch that we just worked. So now we have tacked down and bound off 2 more stitches. Now we've come to our second set of just binding off. So we yarn over, knit 1, then you're gonna yarn over again, knit 1, pull your yarn over, and the previous stitch worked up and off. So now I have tacked down and bound off 2 sets. Tack down, bound off, bind off. Tack down, bound off, bind off. So you're just repeating this every other 2 stitches. And we're just repeating this every 4 stitches. So just remember when you go to your next 2 that need to be picked up to be tacked down, I bound these off. These stitches were bound off, so I have to come over here to these. So that method will turn out to fully tack down your cuff. And as you can see, if you flip it up, There's going to be an edge here, but you will never feel it because it's flush against your skin and fully stretchy. So I hope that you enjoyed my little tack down and bind off method whenever you're using anything for a folded neckline. Maybe the brim of your hat. I also used this on my Harlow hat that I made last year, which I forgot to grab and show, but I also used it on the brim of a hat. I've used it on every sweater neckline, and now the cuff of a sock. A great method for tacking down anything that's folded and still maintaining your stretch. So just remember, 2 stitches get tacked down and bound off. Don't forget that yarn over. Then your next 2 will just be bound off. Again, don't forget the yarn over. And if you have an odd number of stitches, work the last one however it's meant to be worked in order and call it a day. If in the beginning you find that it's a little gapey, just pull your working yarn a little snugger as you're working, and you can take your tail and cinch that up when you weave in your ends. But it's a great little tool and trick to have so you don't lose your stretch. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and happy knitting, everybody.